Muslims Connected, the Muslims Connected, the Muslims Connected, the Muslims Connected, the Muslims Connected podcast. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Yasin Pons, and this is the Muslims Connected podcast. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Yasin Pons, and this is the Muslims Connected podcast, a podcast for those looking for light and direction. Today we are joined by the founder, Marwan, the founder of Pigeon Pie, Marwaan Sasman. Assalamu alaikum, shukran for joining us. This is our second time that we're trying to do this take now because we need to get the story straight for you. We are here for this. I don't want block answers. I want fear to talk. This is a conversation. So, you've always been, I'll say, my full life that I know you, because I know you quite a long, is it more than 20 years?
Wow, probably.
And you've always been like a creative lighty that was always just a bit of a different thinker that took a different approach to every aspect of your life. I feel like you always followed your own path. When did that start and where did that come from?
I think our family, we had a lot of challenges growing up, and just seeing my parents, seeing my siblings make the most of what they had and what they were given was an inspiring thing to see. And when I got into school and when I started working at school, I was very interested in pursuing things that I felt I could reach my potential in. So anything I felt even an inkling of being good at, I started to double down on that and just completely go crazy. Anything that I wasn't good at was like, I'm not going to do that at all. Things like PE, as an example. Then it was not good at PE, but I was not good at PE.
Same.
But I started realizing, and it wasn't always like that. Early in schooling, I actually wasn't doing that well in school, and we were actually at school together back then. I don't know if you remember Mr. Ibrahim.
Yes.
So in Standard 1, I don't know if it was Standard 1, but the teachers had a meeting with my mom that I wasn't doing that well in school, and that I better pull up my socks, or I might need to stay back a year, or I'm not going to do it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know why I needed to pull up my socks. And I remember at that point, I told myself, I'm going to make this work. Then we had really good teachers at the schools that we were at, and Mr. Ibrahim just came to mind now. Mm-hmm. But there were many good teachers that explained things extremely well. And I started to really grow an interest in logic-based subjects, things like maths, biology, things that you build on your knowledge, like physics. You have particular theorems, and then you can work with that and you can build something. And I still really do enjoy building things based on logic. And then on the other side, I really enjoyed art. I was very introverted. I would spend a lot of time alone, and sitting down and drawing was one of the most meditative things that I could do as a child. My parents were going through a divorce. For a large part of my childhood, my mom was a single parent. So there was a lot of tension and fighting in the house and shouting in the house. A lot of that was difficult. And I think that's what pushed me into creative pursuits. Things like drawing, things like music, anything that allowed me to create was a really big escape for me, and it became part of my life. So moving forward, creativity was a very big thread for me, while I really enjoyed logic-based kind of puzzle-type things. So those two threads has always been an important thread for me.
And then you mentioned PE, but I feel like you can also mention skateboarding, because I feel like that was a physical sport that both of us took on relatively at the same time, that needed it was the one physical thing that we could both, I'll say, commit.
That is so true.
Yeah.
That is so true. I never felt like I could fit in anywhere. And still today, there's a lot of spaces I go into, I feel like I do not fit. I know that a lot of people probably feel that way. It's not unique to me. Everybody in this room probably feels like they don't fit. But that feeling of not fitting in anywhere, skateboarding comes along, Rage Against the Machine comes along. I think during the 90s, was it the 90s? Is that when we were in school? Early 2000s. We're not that old. I think counterculture was a very big thing in early 2000, and I think it was something that was very interesting to me. I love this idea of people, this kind of DIY movement of people. Can I say screwing on this podcast? Like screwing the corporate
to the man.
to what was going on in the world and saying, we're going to do these things ourselves. We're going to make things work ourselves. We are going to strive for things that we want, and we're going to build the world that we want. And that was extremely attractive to me. So counterculture, like what you were saying, there was more going on in the world than what we were taught in classes. And there was more going on in the world than what we were learning at home. And I think those kind of influences were instrumental to the way kind of my life shaped itself as it went forward.
It's also that thing of art and maybe it's counterculture was also being able to fit into a space that wasn't a mainstream, but also those spaces were seen as rebels. But those are also just kids finding their own way to do things.
Yeah.
That thing of you don't belong in a rugby team, but you stand with guys skateboarding and then you go, yo, I'm still part of a team. Just we're all doing our own thing.
Yeah.
And then also it allowed you to practice alone and get better in your own space. Like with art as well, where you could find a space that you could go, I control everything here, and like become a recluse and still be creative in that space. And then like with skateboarding, you go, learning to kickflip, I feel like is something that doesn't get enough credit for how much work you need to put in and how determined you need to be.
But that feeling when you land.
I remember you phoning me like one evening going, yes, and I landed a kickflip.
That feeling when you land a kickflip, I could never recreate it. I think it was maybe like 5 times in my life I landed a kickflip. Wow. Yeah, but that feeling is
what are the lessons that you've learned from your counterculture season?
I think at that point I could understand that we could do things for ourselves. That if there was something we wanted to see in the world, we could create that. I don't know if you went to the art school, if we were in art school together.
Thank you, Bay.
Yes. That was the first time I founded a group of people that had that same kind of thought. Like, how do we can just put a piece of blank paper down and we can create something out of that blank paper. And we could go into a box of random knickknacks and we could take things and we could turn it into something that's usable, that's valuable to somebody else. And this idea of being able to create things that's valuable to somebody else, I think it meant a lot to me. I think today it still means a lot to me. And I think it really is what drives me to want to be involved in the production of work, in the production of things, in the solving of problems.
I feel like the world also at the time was very much South Africans making for South Africa for the first time. Like there was nothing before that was spoken in our voices by people of our skin color, people of our worlds getting to be represented. Like we spoke earlier about the Pure Monate show, and those were like guys doing it for the first time, but those were also influences for us to push further than them. So then what else what I'll say was part of the influences that was pushing you?
I really loved this idea that there were people out in the world who they weren't necessarily counterculture. It wasn't punk. They weren't destroying the man. They weren't destroying the world. They were looking at ways that they could solve problems for people, solve problems for themselves. They could solve problems for communities, for countries. And they could do it in a way that was sustainable, that was meaningful to their teams, that drove them forward to do things. And I found that in entrepreneurship and I found that in business. And that really inspired me to want to move in that direction. I don't know what else to say about that, but that was really one of the early inspirations for me to get into business. I wanted to work with people who had a personal investment in making the world better. And those were the kind of people I wanted to find.
Where did you study?
At Vega.
And what did you study?
Brand communications.
And then what was that, I'll say, space like going into as well? Because it's also, we came from like a, I'll say, a community school, where it was a very small world. And even the influences that we had, once you left school, you realized, oh, the world is so much bigger. So what was it like going from a small school of, what's it like, 800 people, going into a world that has everything?
Yeah, not even university, but okay, so in school, to me, school was a box, and it was a very difficult box. I never really felt like I fit in. It's difficult to be an introvert in high school. It's difficult to kind of find your place when you've kind of got this creative side, but then you've got this logical side, and they're both kind of pulling at each other. And going to art school, to Frank Joubert, after school, and when I started doing the evening classes, I think it was twice a week, and finding this other group of people that were similar to me, and we kind of felt like we were the same, and seeing that there were creative pursuits outside of this box really started to open my eyes that there was a different world. The teachers didn't require us to call them sir or miss or Mrs. or whatever they were. We could call them
By their name.
We could call them by name. And that was such a wild concept in high school. Because in our primary school, there's always sir or miss. In our high school, the sir or miss. And then there was this art school. So that was like the first kind of opening up of, wow, the world is actually very different. I mean, all of a sudden, the adult, which was the teacher, was a peer. And they treated us as adults. And all of a sudden, you take on this different responsibility. And at home, we weren't treated like adults. At home, we were children. And even if you go visit your parents today,
Auntie and uncle.
you're still children. Like, you're still a child in your parents' eyes. But anyway, so Frank Joubert was the first kind of, wow, the world was actually much bigger than I think it is. Then that helped me choose the university that I wanted to go to. And there were multiple universities, and Vega was one of the universities that had a strategic path and a creative path. So you can see how I had those two sides, and like, wow, I really love that idea. And then that was one of the next kind of steps of how does the world open up. And when I think back on it now, back then, that was a big culture shock.
I can imagine.
Because our primary school was a Muslim primary school. Our high school was a secular. So we had all different kinds of people in our high school.
But still
it was still a small...
It's still like a colored high school
Yeah.
at the same time. So the influence and the culture was very much of a certain, like everybody experienced the same, a similar life at least.
Similar-ish, and then Frank Joubert was the first time like, wow, there are a few people that we have the same thoughts, but we have completely different backgrounds. And then in university, it was just like, what? Like there were people driving to university with their own cars. Like that blew my mind. Like, where did you get a car?
Why can you afford a car?
Why can you afford a car? And all of a sudden, there were people who had cars, and I got a scholarship to study. So I was lucky. If I did not get a scholarship, I don't know where I would have gone. I don't know what I would have done. But being in the university and being exposed to people from different backgrounds, your world opens up a little bit more. Vega did a really good job as well in choosing guest lecturers that were also wildly out of the norm. Like wildly out of the norm. Like not just someone who dresses funny, but someone who is wildly out of the norm. I can't even explain just how unexpected some of those encounters were, and how some of those people were, some of those perspectives were. And then you start to meet people from different walks of life, and you start to realize that we're all very much the same. Like we can find people with the same thoughts from a different part of the world. So slowly my world is starting to open up in university and starting to see more. When I think back on it now, it was still a very small part of the world, but it was amazing. Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, an amazing experience.
Because you had the idea for Pigeon Pie early on already.
Yeah,
Like
my
the concept, at least you knew what you wanted to do to the world, and or what you wanted to give to the world. I mean,
what I wanted to do to the world.
yes.
I'm going to do it to the world if it wants it. When I left university, my initial plan was actually to work for a few years. But an opportunity came up. I got a potential business opportunity. I was like, okay, you know what? This is actually the time to start doing this. Some of my logic back then when I left university, because I was still staying at home, so I didn't have a large overhead of rent. I just had to contribute to food and electricity at home. There was nothing else I had to contribute to. It was the biggest safety net you could ever have. And I think for Muslim people growing up in South Africa, that is one of the best. It doesn't matter because we did not come from any wealth. But most Muslim families in South Africa stay together during their school years. And it's one of the best times to experiment. So when I left university, I decided, because of the opportunity, to start in business, to just give it a shot. I honestly believe that I could do it. Like, if I think back now, I didn't know what I was doing, but I really believed that I knew what I was doing because I did it all through university. I did an internship. I worked for a little bit freelance inside of an ad agency. I didn't think the environment was the kind of environment I wanted to work in. I honestly believed that I could do it. And I think it comes from the DIY culture. And
But it's also the small percentage of delusion that you must have in yourself, even where you need to almost like fake your own your own confidence to go, I can do this, even despite all the anxiety and the fears that lie, and you can see, you just go, I can do this. This is the thing.
yeah,
Because I feel like that's also been you were always headstrong, where you like make up your mind, you're gonna go into and you're gonna commit. Because I think we spoke about the business just before you started it. Like we would randomly meet this that. And when you told me, and then I was like, that's such a big person thing to do. You know, we're still children. Like I just stopped at the university at the time, and you talking about the business you're starting. And then once you told me, I go, I think you can do it. Like I believed in you. You were a great salesman for the idea. But then what companies were you busy with, or people were you surrounded by that you saw that was the need, and that Pigeon Pie had to become that thing?
I think it was a lot from media that I was consuming. I exposed myself to a lot of entrepreneurs online, videos online. I don't even know if it was online or if it was in person. I attended a lot of business events to network. I was attracted to that kind of inspiration. And I started to see that there were a lot of people, a lot of businesses who were really doing amazing work, building the best products or the best initiatives or the best services, were doing absolutely astounding work, but they could never engage with their audience. They could never market their work. They could never get the word out about the things they were doing. And the only option they had was to go to an ad agency, but it was impossible at the time. It was impossible for a small business. And at the time, I was only looking at small businesses. It was impossible for them to approach an ad agency. So I wanted to create an agency where those people could come, where we could enable them to achieve those goals that they want to achieve, where we could give them access to the skills that I had access to, where we could give them access to writing, to design, to web development, to various different kinds of strategic services for their marketing and for their business. And I really thought that I could do it, and I could. For the people that I was working with back then, I could.
What of your first clients, I'll say?
So one of the very, 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 very first clients I got, and I think this is a testament to how our parents always support us. So one of the first things I did was I made business cards because I'd go to all these networking events and I made these business cards. There were these round, because Pigeon Pie. So I made these round
Explain
Pigeon Pie
the name
business
and
cards.
the concept of it.
Okay, I think maybe it relates to what I was just saying earlier. So when growing up, my mom always used to tell me the story about life in District 6. And one of the things that you'd find in those small communities, and you still find it today, like if you're going to Surrey State, wherever you will find it today, one of the things that existed in those small communities was if someone has something, they always share it with the next person. And that was the culture that they had. If someone down the street is having a wedding and they can't afford a hall, everyone in the street will bring together their tables and chairs and they'll do the wedding in the street. If your neighbor doesn't have a particular food or vegetables, you'll pass that and you'll give that to them. And there was this culture of people knowing each other and people helping each other and people sharing what they've got. So my mom's dad, my grandfather, he used to keep pigeons. I believe he used to raise them. I don't know how true that is, or if my mom misunderstood what he did with those pigeons. Who knows? And they would make pigeon pie. So I would imagine when she would tell me the story that she'd have the pigeon pie and she'd cut a few slices and she'd share it with the neighbors. And that was the inspiration behind the name for the business. It was a reminder for me that the business is meant to share the things that we have that the business might not have access to, like the creative skills, like the strategic skills, like the talent pools that we have access to. But it's also to help businesses share what they've got with the rest of the world so that they can grow and achieve the things they need to achieve. So Pigeon Pie is about sharing, or about that kind of concept of sharing.
I remember in that first time that we spoke about it, you were like, everybody can have a piece of the pie. And then it's such a basic, simple understanding. And I go, yes, we should. Like if I'm working with you, then anyone that works with you should have access to me also. And that thing of like, we should be helping each other because you don't lose when you share. That's another thing. I feel like a lot of times we were taught, oh, if you share, you have less. But you actually get more if you share because you open yourself up to other people.
Yeah.
So you benefit more from all of that.
Yeah.
And so your business cards now, or the round business cards get back to
So I have these round business cards. I cut them out by hand. So that was before I could afford. The first few business cards I had, I actually printed on a home printer. And they would come out. I designed them on the computer, on my brother's computer. I had none of my own stuff, actually. It wasn't even my printer that I used to print them. I designed them on the computer, pirated software. Can I say that on this podcast? I don't want to get arrested.
No, but you've grown. So I feel like people must know that you did everything that you could to get that you needed to do.
So you always have a connection. Someone has the pirated software. They give it to you. I got it. Perfect. Sharing, you're right. I create these business cards. I print them out. And then I spend like an hour or a few hours at night cutting these circles out. Because when I'd go to the business networking event, I'd hand out so many of them. I'm speaking to people. They'd ask me for it. I'll be like, oh, yeah, I've got one. Here you go. I would make as if, my business is, well, they're all working over there. It's doing fine. Call us. We'll be able to help you. Anyway, I have these circular business cards and I start handing them out everywhere. Some people send me an email, here and there. Nothing really leads to business. My very first client actually comes from someone my mom gave my business card to. Like, that's just so weird to think about it now. Like, there's no way it would happen today. But back then, anything goes.
You also never know how far your work goes or your business card goes and in what conversation your name is said.
Yeah.
It's just on another note, I know you as a very, like I'll say, quiet, introverted person. But when you speak about your business, you were always like ready to speak and present. What's the change in, I'll say, personality?
I'm actually schizo. When in university, getting exposed to a lot of different kinds of people helped me come out of my shell a little bit more. And I was faced with needing to present my work. I was faced with needing to engage different kinds of people. And when I left university and I started a business, it became a matter of life or death. I could not run the business if I could not speak to people. So I forced myself to go to networking events every single weekend. If there was a networking event, I would go. There were like really bad networking events that I wouldn't even go to today. And because it was cheesy or the bank was running it and like all these weird kind of places, but I would force myself to go. And I would force myself to go alone. Because if I was alone, I would have to speak to somebody. And slowly, over time, like on the first few times you go, you're like that weird person. And you're just kind of standing there and like, what are you drinking over there? Or like, what did you think of the talk? Like, what do you do? And like you have this weird little small talk. And slowly over time, you just kind of expose yourself and you just keep exposing yourself to it. And eventually that confidence builds. And so that was before the business was properly operating. And once the business started operating in a better way, then more of the confidence comes from the work and your belief in your capability to achieve what you say you can achieve. And I think a lot of the additional confidence comes from, I know that we can do what we claim we can do. I also know that no matter what kind of gets thrown at us, we figure out ways to solve particular problems. So that gives me a lot of confidence as well.
So then now your first client is there. Who's your first client?
So it was an amazing business. They did cultural tourism, and they did different kinds of tours, Malay tours, different kind of Afrikaner tours, different kinds of tours around the Western Cape. And that was the very, very, very first client that we ever had. I don't know if I ever told that client that they were our first client.
You're not supposed to.
I don't know. Did I say like, wow, you're our first client? They're like, oh, we've got so many clients this month. Like, I'm so glad I could fit you in. But she was attracted to that business card because she found it very unique that it was round and she couldn't put it in her wallet and it just ended up being on her desk. And then she had to call. So that was the first project that I ever did. And we did so much work, or I say we, but I did so much work because back then I would do every single thing. And I think it relates back to what I was doing in university, or what I was doing before university. I had all these different threads and I really believed I could do all those things. So I did the strategic foresight for the business. I did the design. I did the writing. I organized and managed the printing, all of these things for the different parts of the business. Where was I with that story? So that was the very, very first client. And I remember thinking, when I quoted that client, like, wow, this is the most money I've ever seen in my life.
It must come to you.
Like, I can't believe that I can actually earn this on this project. The project takes about 6 months to complete. A lot of small little pieces, a lot of waiting, a lot of things the client needs to do on their side as well. Of course, when I look back on that amount that I quoted for that project now, wow. I was living at home. I was living at home. So it was a lot of money, and I just came out of school. I didn't understand how the world works. I don't have a concept of costs of things. And back then, I really thought it was quite a lot of money. But earning that first amount of money allowed me to buy my first computer. It allowed me to print professional business cards, and it allowed me to survive until the next client.
Did you make your new business cards also around as well?
Yeah, it was almost exactly the same, except it was printed professionally, so I had a professional printer. But I still hand cut it, so I couldn't afford to cut it at the printers yet. And it shows you how small that amount of money was that I charged for that first project. Because I was just very excited to have someone.
Because I think that's also another thing as an entrepreneur is knowing your worth and sticking to your guns when you going, I want so much money, please.
Yeah.
Because we always like, we pull it back where we go, oh no, it's too much money. Like there's that sense of disbelief in ourselves.
Yeah, I think disbelief is a big part of it. I don't know if that's all of what it was though, because over the years after that, I discovered my perspective of money and amounts were also very different to my peers or other people who are in business. When you grow up in a poor household, and I'm saying like poor as in, we used to wash the straws. Like we'd have a pack of straws. My mom would force us to wash the straw after we've used it so that we can put it back in the box and we can use it again next time. Like that was the kind of frugal type of lifestyle we had growing up. And 1,000 Rand is a lot of money to somebody who's struggling to get by or to a family struggling to get by. It's a lot of money. You can stretch that 1,000 Rand very far. So I took all of that perspective with me into business. And for the first few years, I didn't understand how small the amounts of money we were charging actually was. So some parts of it, yes, you have that nervousness. Can we charge more than that? But my perspective of what was a lot wasn't even in alignment with reality. I thought 10,000 Rand was a lot of money. I remember looking at it and thinking, geez, that's enough money for a full year. But it was not. And people outside of my brain, people outside of my little bubble, they, of course, knew that 10,000 wasn't a lot of money. So when they hired me to do stuff, like, wow, like this guy.
You think the money's worth it?
Like, wow, he's working so hard. Wow, it's been 6 months and we're only paying him 10,000 Rand. Wow, he's done so much. But anyway, that's the price he's charging. And I thought it was a lot. After I started going to a few business courses and things like that, it helped me realign. But I had many realignment points throughout my life where I could realign my perspective on how the business should run. And I'm sure going forward, I'm going to have many more.
And then you grew the business, so you started employing people also. Because it's your business and it's not a business idea or model that exists already. When you're hiring people, you also had to find something in them to buy. They had to buy into the idea of the business, but also they had to have a spark. What are the things you look for currently when hiring people?
What I looked for back then, I never ever hired successfully. I failed at it, and I don't fail at it as much today. I've changed a lot of the models of the way we work, but back then, whenever I try hiring, I'd hire very poorly. So whatever my perspective was back then, I don't even want to share it because it might not be good. If someone listens to this podcast, it might not be good for them to do that. But I would normally go with a gut feeling, like, wow, this person seems like a good person. I think that they can learn how to do the job. I also couldn't afford to hire like senior people. So I would always be hiring junior people. And that was one of the first mistakes that I would make over and over without learning my lesson. Because what I learned over time was that, yes, the junior person was cheaper. And yes, you weren't making enough money to hire someone more expensive. The junior person required more training, and you actually need more hands-on time with the junior person. So I didn't solve the problem that I was trying to solve by hiring, because I ended up spending more time versus less time just doing it on my own. So I failed at hiring over and over and over and over. And up until probably 5 or 4 years ago, I was still failing at hiring. Like I've had very catastrophic failures for myself emotionally because of how old the business was and how much I was struggling with that problem. So I have no hiring advice and I have no idea. But today, the way we hire today, so all of our projects are custom, the teams are custom built for the client. I've nurtured and worked with a network of professionals, and they find us through various different means, or we put out a call to various networks, and then they find us. So we've got professionals in design, in writing, in development, in photography, in various different spaces. Now what I do is I don't hire for what I think the client can afford. I hire for who will do the best job for what the client needs. And that's how it should have always been. Because if the client can't afford to have the best people to do the job, then we are not the right people to do that job for them. They need to find someone else who they can afford to do the job at the rate that they need. So I could probably go into that much deeper, but to answer your question, I don't know anything about hiring. And I failed massively before, but it's going very well now with the new models and the way it's working. And it's been working for the last 2 years extremely well. But up until about 4 years ago, yeah,
You figured out the old
and it's not the people. Also, it's not the people that I hired. I think they were amazing people. I didn't know how to get the most, or how to get the most out of people. I didn't know how to enable the people I was working with. I didn't know how to equip them to do the things they needed to do, and I didn't know how to select them.
So then also as a entrepreneur in a new business, like what was, besides the hiring, what are the challenges that you had to go through? What are the lessons, not the challenges, what's the lessons you had to learn? Because you never really fail if you're learning. So what are those lessons?
For a long time, my business was my life. So every single thing that I did was for the business. That was my income. It was my hobby. It was my profession. The business was my life. It was even my social life, because I'd be spending all my time networking, going to business events. I think the biggest lesson was figuring out that the business isn't my life. Throughout my entire life, every single thing that I achieved through just hard work. I just work harder, work longer, just push. Every single thing. School, I worked extremely hard because I needed to get a scholarship. If I did not get a scholarship, I didn't know what I was going to do after I left.
Also just stop you there, because we were catching on jokes in class. I thought we were both catching on jokes. But you were studying at home, and now you got the bursaries and everything. Then I was like, oh, okay, you are good at the thing. You liking me.
Yeah, you won't believe, in high school, I would sit with so many books, like for hours and hours, just doing tests. So through high school, through university, it's almost like I brute forced my way into success. Like I had a particular ambition, and I could brute force my way to reach that point. And even when starting the business, I brute forced my way into making the business a success. I would work nights, I would work mornings, I would work weekends. I would work every single day. I would put off every single thing in my life in order to make the business work, because it wasn't bringing enough money. I couldn't afford to hire. Why was I not attracting bigger clients? Why am I still struggling? And I just kept working harder and harder and harder and harder and harder and harder and harder. And I started to attend courses and do extra part-time courses. So at night I would study, and during the day I would work. My leisure time, when I'd have my lunch, I'd watch tutorials on YouTube, and I'd watch lectures on YouTube. My leisure time started to eat, or my work started to eat into my leisure time. And that really just went on for years. I told myself that it was going to be worth it.
You're so stuck to your guns in terms of trying and also not getting it right. Not necessarily failing, but not getting it right. In a time where, again, when you're seeing your peers flourish, finding their thing and going forward, you're stuck to your guns. What is the motivation, or is it just your own temperament that made you go?
I don't know. I think it's my own temperament, but I think that when I started the business and in the very early years of the business, I made the decision that that is what I wanted to do. I felt like I could commit my entire life to doing that work, and I would be happy if 50 years from now I was still doing that work. So to me, there was no other option. There wasn't anything else I was interested in doing. And I really wanted to do this. And I was really enjoying the work. And I think the enjoyment was part of what helped me stick to it. But it wasn't healthy for a very long time. And I would always put off other parts of my life. Like, I'll spend more time with family one day when I've made it and I've got money and I can live a relaxed, luxurious lifestyle. Or, I'd spend more time with friends one day. Like, I'd be able to go out on a weekend one day. And I was really kind of postponing my life for a very long time. But I didn't really see a problem with it. And 5 years ago, 6 years ago, this is very fresh in my mind now because it's so recent. I think I reached a point where I really realized what I was doing wrong. And I think it was the biggest, and I do think that's the biggest lesson I've ever learned in business so far. And what I was doing wrong is that I made the entire business my life, and I made my life the business. It reached this point where I was working on the weekends, I was working in the evenings. I wasn't really seeing family, and when I was seeing family, I wasn't really present.
You were thinking about...
I was thinking about work. I started to realize that I had this feeling where my hobbies didn't bring me the same amount of joy anymore. I didn't enjoy, I really love photography. It's like one of my favorite hobbies. I didn't enjoy going out and taking photos anymore. I looked at my camera, I looked at my photos, like, I need to be working. Why am I doing this? I didn't enjoy spending time with people anymore because I kept worrying about work. My life started to shrink. I felt like my personality started to shrink. It started to become the business. It started to become my work. And then in 2018, 2019, somewhere around that time, I don't really know the sequence of events. But there was a series of events that happened. And if they perhaps happened in isolation, things would have been okay. But they happened close to each other. And they happened in a way that shone a light on the life that I built for myself. So I think the first sign, I got a call from one of my clients. And I was busy working with another client at the time. So I saw the call, and I'm like, okay, I'll call this person back. They called me, like, okay, fine, I'll call them later. It's already kind of after hours, 6 o'clock. I'm still busy working with another client. I'll call them back later. I end up getting home at like 7 or 8, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to call them. A few weeks go by, and I completely forget that they called me. A few weeks go by, I find out this person has passed away. And I'm like, wow, this is devastating because it's a client that I've been working with on particular projects that we were still in the middle of working on. And now they are gone, completely gone. Like, we're not even close, but it was someone in my life that just completely disappeared. And then finding out that it's possibly suicide, possibly an alcohol abuse problem. And I think to myself, how did I not know that they were abusing alcohol and that they were going on this downward spiral? And then when I think back to the times when we met, I then pick up all these weird little clues. And how could I have not been present? And then around the same time, one of my siblings is going through a divorce. And coming from a family that also experienced divorce, like this is a very painful thing for me. So one of my siblings is going through a divorce, and I could never feel like I knew what to do. Like how are you there for them? Like how do you be there for them? And I'm not even that close with my siblings, but it is one of those things in that series of events that started to shine a light on the life that I built. So then, one of the other things that happens around this time, my mom had to move out of our home. At this point, I already moved out, and I was living alone for a very long time. But then my mom also had to move out because none of the children are staying in the home anymore. Like we've all already kind of moved on, gone on with our lives. So she had to move out of the home because she had to move into a smaller space. And the space she was moving into didn't have a shower. It only had a bath. And it had kind of this small little bathroom. And as siblings, we all had to kind of come together, figure out how we're going to build my mom a shower so that she can so we had to all put together so we can build a shower for her. But I wasn't doing extremely well in business. Yeah, this is difficult to talk about.
It's also, we are here for the conversation. You can take your time with it. If you also want to move onto the next part, that's also fine. But right now, I also feel like we are learning because we also, I say we also people where we don't speak about the things that have given us light to the new life and the new perspective that we get.
Yeah. So anyway, so then we have to put together to build the shower for her because she's elderly. She's in her 60s, early 70s, like around that age. And we have to put together to build the shower for her. And it's a difficult task because we have to put together enough money to build the shower for her. And I wish I could have contributed more. And I realized that for my entire life, for the last 10 years, I've been building this business. I've been working. I've been sacrificing time. I've been sacrificing weekends. I've been sacrificing evenings. And now when a family member needs assistance, I didn't have enough money to assist. So something is clearly wrong in my business. How is it that I'm still scraping by after so many years of working so hard? And it was extremely painful for me to not be able to contribute. And I could contribute what I could, but it was difficult for me to contribute that amount. And it was painful for me to not be able to give my mom the kind of comfort that I think she deserves in her old age. And then around that same time, I'm working on this project that I was working on with a client for the last 2 years. That's a very big project, and it's going up towards the launch date. And we're a few weeks away from launch date. So for the last 2 years, we're working on this big project. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of complexity. And at this point, I wasn't hiring. So I was still doing a lot of stuff on my own. And I'm working and I'm working and I'm working. And it's a hectic project. And we're reaching this deadline. One of the mornings, somewhere around 9 o'clock, 9:30, my phone rings. And I can't remember who it was. It might have been my sister, it might have been my mom. But when you get a call from a family member during working hours, like you get that feeling, like, wow, I do not want to answer this phone. Okay, I'm thinking, geez, okay, I'm in the middle of, let me answer this. I hope it's not a long conversation. Let me answer this call. I'm in the middle of a crazy deadline. I answer the call. My dad had a heart attack. He woke up in the morning. Don't know what happened. He collapsed. He got rushed to hospital, and he's still experiencing the attack right now. in the ambulance, or I don't know how they got into hospital, but he's still experiencing the attack. And we're all going to the hospital because we don't know what the outcome of this is. And it sounds really bad. And it was really bad. So all of us as siblings, we all drop what we're doing and we all rush to the hospital. And we go to the waiting room and we're all waiting inside over there. And we can look through the small little window and we can see him in the, that first room after the emergency room, where if it's a real emergency, they put you in that room. That's where my dad was, and he was laying there, and there was just a bunch of people around him trying to work on him and figure out what they could do. And I remember standing there and thinking, I've got a deadline I need to get to. And this situation is overpowering that feeling of the deadline, and it's overpowering that feeling of work, and work just disappears completely. And it's just a shock. I don't know what's going on. And growing up, my dad wasn't really even in our lives, so he's not even close to me. But this is someone that I'm not that close to, but it's a parent. Yeah. And it's my father. And he could pass away. He could die right here, right now. And I can't even be present because I've got this looming work and deadline, and I can't even take off time. But the emotional distress is very apparent. And for that week, I can't concentrate on work. I let my clients know I'm going to be unavailable for work for the next week due to a family emergency. And for that week, we're visiting the hospital and we're going. My dad does eventually make it through. Mm-hmm. But then I get back to work and I have a meeting with the client of this really big project. And we sit down and he looks at me and he says, we understand that you kind of had a family emergency and your father was in hospital. But we were really worried because we had this deadline coming up. We don't know what's going on with the work. We don't know, while you were away, who's going to be taking over? Who's going to be doing this work? Who's going to be completing this work? Are we going to reach our deadline? We've invested 2 years into creating this project. And we weren't sure when you were going to come back. And at that moment, I realized my business is broken. Because if something happens to me, the business is gone. Mm. There were no systems in place. There were no fallbacks. I wasn't charging enough. And all the way up until that point, I thought that charging a low amount was for the benefit of our client. Mm. And in that moment, I realized that charging too little is to the detriment of the client, because I charged so little that I couldn't even hire somebody to take over for me while I was away. Mm. Because I couldn't find someone at that rate. I couldn't find someone at that cost. I was paying myself the lowest cost I could possibly find because I thought clients liked that. Yeah. And so in that moment, I realized my business is broken. I have no systems in place. So even if I could hire somebody, how am I going to hand over the work to them? There's no systems. I was just making things up as I was going along. And that I was the business. And from that point, I then undertook the journey of figuring out how to fix it. And everything that you see today, and maybe even the confidence that you see in me today, is because of the journey that commenced from that point onwards. Because from there, it wasn't easy, and that was in 2019, 2018. A lot of other things happened after that, where not a lot of things happened, but I experienced burnout and I experienced depression over a period of 12 months. But I don't know if you want to get into that. But from that point to where we are today, where I am today is a result of that lesson. Because if that did not happen, I would have probably still been doing everything that I did pre 2018, pre-2019, because I was earning enough for myself. And it was fine, I was doing the work. But only at that point did I realize that it's like my business was so fragile that all it took was 1 week for me to be away and everything broke.
And now you live a healthier life now in terms of work-life balance. What are some of your hobbies that you've gone back to or that you've started so that you start enjoying life again?
So photography is one of my biggest hobby. It gives me a way to explore the world. It gives me a way to meet people. It gives me a way to engage with the world. And if you actually look at the timeline, you'll see around, I have folders for every single year and every single month on my computer of photos. And if you look at the timeline of those photos, you'll see around 2018, 2019, like there's much less folders for those years. But photography is one of the biggest hobbies that gives me another creative outlet that is not my business. Because the business can't be everything to me. A few other things that I've kind of committed to after the journey from 2019 forward was to put better boundaries in place when it comes to work. Work is work and life is life. So I stopped postponing life. I try to catch up with people who I haven't caught up with in years. I try to be present with family. I try to see family more than what I used to. I got married. There's a lot of things that I postponed because I was waiting for the time for my business to be perfect. But it's never going to be perfect. But it's work, and work continues, and you need to understand work is a work in progress. So those boundaries for different parts of your life is important. Things like, I have to stop work. I'm not even supposed to be here today.
It's after 5.
I don't know why we are doing this so late. I promised myself I won't do anything that's work, like kind of business related. I won't do anything business related after hours anymore. So now I'm very strict. If an email comes in, if a WhatsApp message comes in, if anything comes in after 6 o'clock, let's say 6 o'clock's the hard cutoff, then it's for the next day. I try not to think about work or not to do work during those periods. It's time for me to spend with my wife. It's time for me to spend time on my hobbies, on myself, on other creative pursuits.
Makes the business better also. Because
absolutely.
You would absolutely come to work, not just, I was here at work, today I'm at work, tomorrow I'm at work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The amount of yourself. So previously, I thought I was giving all myself to the business. But the amount of yourself you can give when you put very clear boundaries in place, I wouldn't say it's infinite, but you can really give yourself to the relationships in your life. You can give yourself to the other creative pursuits in your life. You can give yourself to other parts of your life. And you don't have one part of your life sucking the life out of everything else. So having clear boundaries on working hours was very important for me to make things work. Having a good sleeping time was important. No working into the night. I'm not even letting my hobbies keep me up at night, even though that does happen sometimes. Understanding that we do business, that the work we do should have meaning. And the kind of work, like whether you're in a normal career and you have a job, it should be meaningful to you. But it doesn't need to be all the meaning you have in your life. You can find meaning in other parts of your life as well. And if you're stuck in a job that has no meaning, you can find other areas of meaning in your life, whether it's children or family or creative pursuits or other hobbies. So just making sure that I keep those things in check. It's not easy. It doesn't always work out, but balancing those things and being aware of those balances, I think is important.
I normally wrap up with a question of what advice do you have for young entrepreneurs? But I feel like the story you just told us gave us all the advice that we also need to implement in our life. But are there any things that we missed out on that you would tell young Marwan to look out for?
First of all, young Marwan would absolutely not listen to me because, and I'm still like that today, actually. I didn't listen to anybody.
It's true.
So many people gave me advice, and there's a lot of advice out there. But like you said, I've got a very one-track mind. Like once I decide on something, that's it for life for me. I can make a decision, and that's it for life. It's very difficult to change my mind once I've committed to something. But the advice I would give to somebody who would give to my younger self, I think it's about finding balance. For a large part of my life, brute forcing hard work was a way to reach success. But in the last few years of my life, I realized I'm really experiencing more success than I've ever experienced while I was brute forcing hard work. If you're working on the wrong thing, it doesn't matter how hard you work. For so many years, I was working on the wrong things. And once I started to see that, all of a sudden, you get the fruits of your work. So understanding that hard work is not everything, but I wish there was a more eloquent way that I could say this, but yeah, hard work really isn't everything. You need to pay attention, and you need to feed, and you need to nurture the other parts of your life. Like that aspiration you have, pursue it. That hobby that you've got, pursue it. Those relationships that mean something to you, invest time into it. Be present. Be with people. And your life will be so much richer than having kind of a one-track focus, tunnel vision. Because overachievers always get tunnel vision. People who are overcommitted to things always get tunnel vision. But there's so much more to the world. There's so much more to life than what we think it is. And even today, what I think it is.
Shukran for sharing with us. Shukran for giving us life lessons. I've learned a lot from this today. I've learned a lot from, even though I know you for so more than 20 something years, I learned who you are and how you became this that you are. We wish you all the success for your business, for your life, not just your business, for your life and everything that was come with it. Assalamu alaikum. Shukran for joining us. I'm Yasin Bonds, and this is the Muslims Connected podcast with Marwaan Sasman.